for putting together the conference this year. And just welcome for those of you who came in person and for those of you who are watching in pajamas. So right now let me introduce our vision speaker, Sarah Lambden. Sarah is currently a professor at the Cooney School of Law. Her educational background includes a master's degree in library science, in legal information management, and a law certificate in environmental law. Her research focuses on information law and policy across the spectrum from open government to personal privacy. Her current projects focus on the transition of publishers and library service providers towards personal data collection and analytics and the implications of this transition on privacy and intellectual freedom. Her forthcoming book, Data Cartels, published by Stanford University Press, investigates the consequences of the consolidation of data analytics companies in financial, risk, academic, and legal information markets. Sarah also works with organizations doing government transparency and open access work. She's a Spark Senior Fellow, a member of the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, and an Iowa Community Council member. She also partners with immigration groups on government surveillance issues. Today, Sarah's presentation will discuss what does the transition from publishing to data analytics mean for libraries. She'll give the presentation. There'll be a question and answer period at the end, so please hold your questions until then. We have a mic in the middle for those of you who are in the room with questions, and you can also use the Discord platform to join the conversation under the Discord channel, Vision Session Sarah Lambden. Thank you.
Sorry, it's going to take me 1 second. I have not spoken to a live group of people since, 2019. So this is very exciting for me. So, okay, I'm putting water. And I'm wearing a full outfit. I'm not wearing sweatpants on the bottom. Okay. But I am envious of all of you at home who are wearing sweatpants on the bottom. I'm just going to throw that out there. But it's also really great to be in person with all of you, and it's been really fun so far to be at a real conference. So welcome. As Jen mentioned, I'm a librarian, and I'm also a lawyer. And right now, my role is I'm a law professor. And actually, my role as a law professor is kind of what has allowed me to do this research and to write about this stuff, because I think it's really hard to talk about what I'm about to talk about when you're in a library and when you're in the position of negotiating with vendors. It's really hard to step back and critique vendors or think kind of about the larger implications of what vendors are doing because honestly, because of leverage, right? We work with vendors. And I know, I've had trouble discussing this in professional organizations, library organizations. So I feel like I talk about this in groups of librarians because I have the luxury of tenure and not being near contracts and being located outside of a library now. So take that with a grain of salt, and I understand why these conversations can be a little fraught. So I don't think we need to come out, in a big way. And also, the main thing I want to specify is this discussion is about vendors and it's about our relationship with vendors, but it's not a bashing on vendors. We're cooperative with vendors. There's a lot of great things that vendors do. I have always loved the people I've worked with in the organizations I'm about to talk about. So I hope nobody feels like this is somehow adversarial or, an attack. This is just a list of kind of things that we've all noticed about vendors in the last decade or so as we've kind of transitioned from paper resources to digital resources. So that's kind of what I'm going to discuss today. I'm really going to focus in on the phrase data analytics because that's what our vendors are. Wow, now I have lights, guys. Did you see that? All of a sudden there are lights. So our vendors are actually transitioning themselves from publishing or, ILS services to data analytics. So this is a phrase that they're using. I didn't make this up. And I'm going to talk about what that transition from publishing or from cataloging or from whatever library services we're accustomed to data analytics means for us. Both, what is positive about data analytics, but also what what is maybe problematic from a librarian standpoint. And don't worry, I end this discussion with a list of really kind of simple things that we can do along with our vendors to kind of ease some of our concerns in these areas. So first, I'm going to describe what data analytics are, because it's kind of this very loosey-goosey, ethereal term that we just use to mean like, data things. But it actually does have a meaning, and actually what our vendors are doing is a specific set of things that fall under the umbrella of data analytics. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the big list implications of what data analytics in our libraries means to us and what these companies' changes mean for us. And then solutions, right? And hopefully a really nice, robust Q&A section where you can ask me about all the things that I've learned. I've been researching this topic since 2017, so I have like a lot of, knowledge about this stuff if you have questions about it. So that's what the last 20 minutes will be about, or whatever you want to be about. You can ask me whatever you want. Hey, that's what Q&A is for. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give a really basic definition of what data analytics means. So technically, data analytics is the pursuit of extracting meaning from raw data using specialized computer systems. These systems transform, organize, and model the data to draw conclusions and identify patterns. So when we talk about raw data, we mean personal data that we throw off into the digital atmosphere as we're, searching online or, using our research products. We mean numbers, and polls and just raw bits of information, addresses, phone numbers, just this whole pool of data bits that kind of float around on the internet. But we also mean more structured data that these companies have been collecting and archiving and selling us for years, newspaper articles, blog posts, court cases, academic articles. That technically is information, it's structured data. But I'm going to show you in a few minutes kind of how these companies think of their various data and informational assets and then how they use them. And when we talk about specialized computer systems, we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about artificial intelligence, which some people, would just say is smoke and mirrors. Artificial intelligence is just machine learning and algorithms made to sound very fancy, like somehow it has some sort of sentient intelligence that's separate from its creators. That's a whole different TED Talk that somebody else has already given somewhere out in the world. I'm not doing that. But that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the companies that we're used to using all their data assets, whether it's indexes and their catalogs and check out, circulation records, or whether it's court cases and statutes in academic journals, the kind of stuff that, a Springer or an Elsevier, have, right? Those are all different types of informational assets that are being run through machine learning, other like kind of algorithmic systems and data systems. So that's what data analytics is, and that's what we'll be talking about. Here are some examples of data analytics products. And these are all things that we definitely, each of us, if we are in a library setting, our products include, or the companies that we work with are trying to sell us or have sold us, right? So business solutions, that's a big phrase, especially in like kind of the major data analytics companies, which I really define as like Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis, Thomson Reuters, kind of the big ones with a lot of data assets that work with a lot of private companies. They sell those companies, they sell those businesses advice about what to do based on their data and their data analytics systems, right? Their machine learning systems, algorithms, whatever. They kind of grind data through those systems and make suggestions about what to invest in. What's a good bet, what's a bad bet, what are markets doing, what is your personal healthcare system doing, what is, your law enforcement agency doing, stuff like that. Risk assessment. So risk assessment is how these companies assess all of us. Are we risky? Are we at risk of committing a crime? Are we at risk of committing fraud? Do we have health concerns that might make us riskier to insure? Right? Those are risk assessment products or risk analytics. And the companies that we work with are also generating and selling those. Metrics, we all know, if we work in academia, we all know metrics, right? Academic metrics are a big one. that we work with. But metrics are rankings, right? How to rank people, how to rank institutions, how to rank labs, grants, what have you. Metrics, right? Putting things on a list and saying which is best, which is worst, what's in the middle. Competitive intelligence. So compiling and sorting data about your competitors, about other consumers, right? So kind of mapping out where competitors are in the market and then, doing data visualizations about their size and about their growth projections so you can see who the competitors are in any given market or, among clients. If you're like at a law firm or something, competitive insights are really useful in law firms, and a lot of law firms even have their own like competitive intelligence analysts that work inside of their law firms. Anything that ends with the word insights, so academic insights, science insights, business insights, they sell a lot of insights, which is just taking the data sets that they have, running them through data analytics, and making more insightful information based on whatever those systems spit out. The last one, kind of the creepiest and the most fraught, predictive analytics. So analytics that predict what will happen. Sometimes they're really useful, right? Predicting where there will be the next COVID outbreak, right? Predicting where maybe there will be a drought or how the hurricane season is gonna look. But some of them are predictions about people, right? Who might commit a crime, who might commit fraud, right? Who might, I don't know, all sorts of analytics that we probably deal with every day, where machine learning and algorithms are used to kind of guess at what people are going to do. So that's a little creepy. We'll get more to that later. So here are some examples of data analytics products: academic metrics, COVID-19 projections, stock market predictions, predictive policing. So I want to stop right here and really quickly just say, not all data analytics are bad, right? A lot of data analytics are amazing and really, really helpful, right? Data analytics are doing a lot to benefit society, right? Especially when it comes to tracking illnesses, tracking weather events, tracking global conflict, things like that. Like, data analytics aren't inherently bad, but it depends. Data analytics can be very bad if used incorrectly, if used in a way that perpetuates bias or inequality, et cetera, et cetera. So data analytics on their own can be really useful. So I don't just want to like trash on data. I'm not anti-data analytics, and I don't know if any of us should be, right? Part of progress is accepting new technology, and data analytics is part and parcel of that new technology, right? So while data analytics aren't, they're value neutral, they're not inherently bad or good, they are very different than what we're used to our vendors doing. So publishing and cataloging and all of our other library services are different than data analytics. When our companies are doing data analytics, they're doing something different than what they used to do, right? So traditionally, our vendors did things like print and sell final edited materials, right? You would buy a set of encyclopedias or, an ongoing update of serials or what have you, right? We would get the final published item that has been edited. That's traditional publishing. That's what we're used to getting from our vendors. The transaction in that ends at the point of sale, right? We don't know what went on before we purchased the book, or the serial or what have you. And then they don't know what happens after we purchase it, who we're lending it to, what we're doing with it, right? There's one point of sale where we get the material, whether it's the index update or the book, and we all just kind of move on with our lives, right? We come together, do this one thing, go about our separate ways. There also, in traditional publishing, is no secondary data market. So in traditional publishing, when the publisher or the vendor hands over the item, they're not tracking who uses it afterwards, right? Like, when a book is on your shelf, the circulation desk might keep temporary records, but nobody's tracking the users who use it. There's no platform that you have to log into to get a book from a physical library, right? So the data aspects of traditional publishing are much different. And finally, in traditional library vendors relationships, libraries and readers were the main customers, right? We were the people that Elsevier worked with and wanted to satisfy. And like our main negotiations were with them, and we were their number one customer, right? And it's the same for, I'm a law librarian. So it's the same for the legal world, like Westlaw and Lexis. Like librarians were the main gatekeepers. We were the main company, right? When Westlaw and Lexis were standalone, we were the main consumers that the companies dealt with. So data analytics, on the other hand, it's a whole different business. And data analytics companies that we're used to working with are selling books and serials and what have you online, right? Usually we buy them kind of in a platform or in a bundle. I'm also, in my book, I write a lot about big deals, but here I'm not. We all know, we've all been through the woods of talking about big deals and grappling with them, and we still are. But they sell as finalized products, but in this new world, they also sell raw data that they get from platforms and from actually crunching their data assets, their published materials through data analytics products. And we get data analytics products. So not only are they selling data, but they're selling products back to us, metrics products. In law librarianship, they're selling litigation metrics where, like, if you can afford to, you can buy metrics that will predict how certain judges might treat your case and actually feed you language that certain judges might like based on data analytics. They can tell you like what the hot topics of law are going to be if you're trying to decide what kind of law to, what kind of clients to focus on or attract. So there are all sorts of analytics that they now sell, libraries and consumers. The transaction doesn't end at the point of sale, right? The transaction keeps going. And it's an incomplete transaction. So when we used to buy books, the library owned the books until the books fell apart or until we checked them out and somebody lost them. We could use them however we wanted. We, of course, told our users not to violate copyright, but we weren't necessarily policing. Nobody was policing, the standing by the copying machine and like looking over people's shoulders as they were copying materials, right? But now, in kind of the digital world and in the data analytics world, there are no complete transactions. We only license material that stay on the vendors' clouds, in their servers, right? We borrow their materials, and while we're on their platforms, they're watching us the whole time to make sure that we're not violating, their copyright, which is fine, of course, right? Protect your copyrights. But we are being watched and tracked, and there's no end of sale. There's no truly like private research and private searching because we're doing it all on their platforms because that's what we have to do, right? There are a lot of secondary markets I'll show you in a while. These companies have a lot of new customers. We're not their number one customer anymore, libraries and readers and library users. They have a whole bunch, because now they have these data products that they can sell. So new customers, woo! And libraries and readers are just among those customers, right? So that's kind of what we're dealing with. That's what my book is about. That's what I've been thinking about for the last 5 years, how these differences impact us as library professionals and library, people. So here's just a quick description of how Reed Elsevier LexisNexis actually describes this kind of transition. And I show you this just mainly to show you that they're not hiding this. This isn't secret. They're proud, like they are proudly and openly switching to data analytics from publishing. So Relix Group, which is Reed Elsevier, Lexis, our law platform, right? A lot of our different publishing and vendor resources have kind of consolidated. I'll talk about consolidation a little bit more in a minute, but they've consolidated under a few big umbrellas. One of them is Reed Elsevier LexisNexis, who I'm sure we all deal with a lot. But they say that their heritage is in public, and now they're transforming to a digital data analytics stream, right? So they've managed down their print publishing to just 10% of their sales, which of course we all know that. We buy most of their products digitally now. That's not a surprise. But they're also employing thousands of technologists and investing billions of dollars in growing their data analytics technologies. So they have these tech lab, or I forget where they have a big technology lab where they're really just building machine learning, algorithmic stuff to do more of their data analytics work. And they have recategorized, the Morgan Stanley Index recategorized Relix as a business service company instead of as a media group, right? So they're actually, like, in a very commercial way, not being called a media group or a publisher anymore. They're now a business services company. And as we saw a few slides back, business solutions and business services is like just a phrase that means data analytics, right? So they're changing, and they're not the only one. Here are some of the ways that our companies that we work with all the time describe themselves. So we see these companies as like index companies or catalog companies, but that's not how they describe themselves, right? RELX describes itself as a global provider of information-based analytics and decision tools for professionals and business customers, right? Clarivate, which now owns ProQuest, as we probably all know if we've been following along, Clarivate ProQuest, it provides data, insights, and analytics for the innovation lifecycle, right? They don't provide like an index that helps us find new articles or whatever. They don't provide whatever they said they used to provide. They are a data company. The third item down is from Westlaw's home screen. Sorry, I tend to focus on law librarian products a lot because that's just my world. But it's also the same when you're on like an Elsevier page. You see, not only are they switching to data analytics, they're selling us data analytics products in with our old published product packages. So like with Westlaw, you used to just log on and there'd be databases. You could look at statutes or case law or regulations. Now when you use Westlaw, you can find litigation analytics, actionable data to help you improve your strategy. And when you look like at an Elsevier article, you see on the right-hand side of the screen, at least my screens that I use in my library, you see that they have all these analytics, that will not only give you the primary content that you're looking for, but also kind of overlay like metrics and other, analytics stuff on top of the stuff that we used to buy. And we are either directly or indirectly paying for those analytics products, whether we want to or not, and they're being embedded in all of the products that we use. There's no way to like untangle them and say, hey, Westlaw, I just want the databases, or hey, Elsevier, I want Science Direct, but without the metrics. Like there's no way to do that, right? So we're stuck with metrics and data analytics, whether we want them or not. Bloomberg it used to just be like a financial, it's always been kind of a data company. Full disclosure, I worked at Bloomberg Law for a little while, so I'm familiar with Bloomberg. But they're also really starting to hype up their data analytics as well. I mean, their data analytics are really useful and they have good data analytics. But they are also selling themselves as facing the data, changing the world. That's why I put it there, because I think that phrase it kind of embodies what all of these companies are doing, right? They want you to face the data and use that data to change the world, whether it be science information data, legal information data, financial information data, like what Bloomberg does, et cetera, right? So this is actually a chart from Clarivate's 10K. I think it was like last year's 10K. But this is actually, I like this chart a lot, even though it's kind of blurry. I'll describe it to you. It's Clarivate's own description of what data analytics is and what they mean when they talk about their business. So data analytics getting into data analytics allows them to sell all these layers of data and information products, and they profit at each point. And this isn't unique to Clarivate. I just really like Clarivate's chart, right? So Clarivate, at the bottom, they sell raw data assets. So if you want to buy like just the data, just our data dossiers, personal data dossiers, or dossiers about, their Web of Science index or whatever, you can buy just raw data, right? Then you can buy, on the level above, you can buy data that they've cleaned up, right? They've standardized, they've categorized, linked, right? So they've made it nice. They've included hyperlinks, they've organized it a bit. You could also buy their platform, right? You can buy a platform, and you see that, with every vendor that we deal with. You can buy their platform, and then you get databases that they've organized and that they update, and that they, they provide workflow tools, maybe folders where you can store things you want to read later, right? So they give you not just that raw data, then they give you like a platform that organizes it. But where the real value add is, and where they're going, is the top of this pyramid, the most valuable information that they're trying to sell. They sell predictive analytics that tell users what will happen, and they sell prescriptive analytics that tell users what to do. Those are the two areas that they're really, really looking to get into and to monetize and to make money off of. And of course, that makes sense, right? Like data analytics, algorithms, and all of these, AI, it's improving all the time. There are always like innovative new advancements in data analytics, so they want to capitalize off of that. That makes complete sense. But even though it makes sense, it still profoundly changes their relationship with us and what they're selling us, right? So this is a complex chart that is unique, that Clarivate puts in its materials. Here's a simplified version of this chart. They are increasing the value and the price and the money and the customer base on their informational assets, on the things they already have, their science articles, their SEC filings, their case law, right? Whatever informational assets they have, they're finding new ways to slice and dice them and sell not just the information, not just the platform, but also predictions and prescriptions, answers, right? So that's the part that we need to, I feel like, as library professionals, pay attention to, the answers as a service part, right? That is really where our relationship is changing with them, because answers as a service is kind of fraught. It's kind of imperfect. It's problematic in certain ways. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to talk briefly about the why. So why are our vendors becoming data analytics companies? It's not unique, right? All companies are becoming data analytics companies. So I don't want us to think that our vendors are doing something especially insidious or unique or wonderful, right? They're just kind of following the trend of informational capitalism, right? They are moving away from physical goods and towards selling all the great data that they're getting from all their, digital goods, right? And it's happening. So here are some other examples of other industries, right? The thermometer industry, they can now track, if we all use digital, Internet of Things style thermometers, they can track illness, right? Which is actually pretty useful, I think. They can, our refrigerators track us. They tell us when we're running out of milk, but they also collect information about how much we buy milk, right? So they're also datifying our consumer kitchen goods. Our cars are selling data about how we drive to insurance companies. But that's a very lucrative market for them. Smart clothing, right? I'm wearing a watch right now that's telling the company what my heart rate is right now. How many steps did I take? Where did I take those steps? What's the weather when I took those steps, right? All of that data is really, really useful, and because it's useful, it's profitable. It's a great new asset to sell. And our vendors are doing the same thing, right? And why wouldn't they? They're for-profit companies, and this is a really creative and ostensibly useful way to make more money. So here's the problem that I see with data analytics. When you Google image search the phrase data analytics, these are the images you get. It looks like data analytics is amazing. This looks so cool, right? Like, what does she do? Is she like finding the next, pandemic outbreak? Is she like locating an endangered species? I don't know. Whatever she's doing though, that looks miraculous. I want to live in that. I want to do that. That looks so cool. But in reality, data analytics is a lot more like this. So data analytics is not as perfect as that picture makes it seem. I always compare it to this toy. I don't know if you ever played with this toy. This was like a toy I spent a lot of time with as a kid. But you take different pieces of clay and you squish them through, and you can make like spaghetti hair or tubes. You can make different shaped products. So in essence, that's what the data companies are doing, or the companies we work with are doing. They have all of these information assets. They have millions of academic articles. They have all the case law in the history of the United States, right? They have all the financial data from all the SEC filings since the 1930s when we started having SEC filings, right? They have so much information, and they're taking those information are like chunks of useful clay to them, right? And they're extruding them through their data analytics products that they're building in their data labs, and they're making new data products to sell. And the problem the main problem is we don't know how they're doing that. We cannot see inside their algorithms. Their algorithms are trade secret protected. They're black box. And actually, when Reed Elsevier LexisNexis describes its own data analytics products, they describe it as systems that move so quickly and do so many different functions that they don't even know how their data analytics products work. So we're not sure how they work, but we do know that algorithmic bias and algorithmic errors are a common occurrence. There are whole books written about that. That's also another TED Talk about, if you read anything by Sophia Mujanoble or Ruha Benjamin or Virginia Eubanks, you can Kathy O'Neill. There's so much written about algorithmic bias and the idea that these algorithms might not be on the level. They might not be things we want to depend on. The other problem is biased data sets. Data sets are inherently biased. And they're inherently biased a lot of times because we've been collecting them throughout history, and history is biased, right? So we're dealing with data sets that are really problematic. There are so many examples of this, but because we're in an academic setting, academic articles through time, metrics-wise, the clicks have gone to the more prestigious, bigger institutions, and that alone is a bit of, that leads to more clicks and more citations, and it's kind of the system that generates on itself. Similarly, in the criminal data context, people, especially like black men, have much bigger criminal files than me, a white woman, right? So if you put data into a system like these huge files compared with like my small file, even though it's not fair, that there will be more of that data in the system, and that data will also be pushed to the top, right? So there's data bias, and there's algorithmic bias, and we don't know what's going on in these systems. So I hope these systems are reliable and unbiased, but I'm not sure. Like, we can't be, I don't know. I have no idea. You don't have it. Nobody has any idea. Maybe even RELX itself or the companies who build these themselves don't have any idea. We just don't know. So I like this because, okay, if you look at the picture of the extruder, it's like, whoop, and then like a little product comes out. This is RELX's own description of their product. So if you see on the right-hand side, I think, maybe it's your left. On your left-hand side, those are all the pieces of clay, right? You've got your primary research, your public records, your proprietary data, your news articles, your contributory databases. Those are all things that they sell us, and that we use on their platforms. We're familiar with all this, the case law, the academic articles, what have you, right? Those are their raw data assets and informational assets. Then they do something that is mysterious here in the middle, in that extruder part. They decrease content volume and increase content quality, and like there's a little swirl of stuff that happens. I don't know what it is. But then things come out the other side. And you can buy those things. You can buy entity resolution, link analysis, clustering analysis. You can buy all these data analyses that the company does. So that begs the question, I've heard that that's not the correct phrase, and I'm saying it incorrectly right now, and I apologize, but begs the question. We're not going to get into a grammar discussion right now, but I've said what I said, and now we are going to ask this question. What does it have to do with libraries? What does it have to do with us? I've kind of gotten to these, but this is just a neat list, and my slides are online, so you can reference these later if you desire. This has led to vendor consolidation, and that's partly because platforms, informational platforms especially, kind of move towards consolidations. All industries move toward consolidation as they mature, but vendor consolidation in the library world is interesting because library information and information generally is non-fungible, which means that like one court case, you can't just exchange it with another case, right? You can't exchange one journal article. If you asked me for a journal article about COVID, and I gave you a journal article about malaria, and I was like, oh, it's the same thing, it's a journal article. That doesn't work, right? So these companies are all trying to collect as much data assets and information products as possible because every piece is unique, and the company that has more has the more robust platform. And the company with the most robust platform will win because we all need the most robust platforms in our library, right? Like if you can't get, I know, like in law librarianship, there's this problem where you can't get American law media products unless you also have Lexis. The only way you can get it is through Lexis. So a lot of us continue to use Lexis, not fully, but in large part because we need access to those materials because you can't get them anywhere else, right? So that's kind of one of the factors of consolidation that's unique to information. We are no longer their first and only customers. I'm going to show you who some of their other customers are in a moment. Our data is treated differently and seen differently as a resource. Our data as consumers now is useful in a new and different way. They can collect data from their platforms once we buy their product, and our patrons' data is now a whole new ballgame. It's something interesting and useful for them. And our library's data. How often is this article clicked in your library, right? What is your library, what does the traffic look like in your library on this platform, in your part of the country, right? They can use data in a whole new ways. Our products are changing. We are getting, as I showed you before, all sorts of predictive and prescriptive bells and whistles added into our products without our consent. But we are paying for them, right? We are buying things kind of in that kind of vein of like big deal purchasing. We are now getting data analytics kind of rolled into our products and contracts. And we are more and more only able to access the materials we need in their walled garden platforms. We have to have sign-ins and logons. I was just talking to someone yesterday about how hard it is to integrate a password-protected platform into some of the systems that we're trying to use to make it easier for our library visitors to access information online, right? But because they want as much data as possible, they are requiring unique user logins where every person has to log in so they can be uniquely tracked around their platforms, right? So platforms and the kind of walls put around them are also causing problems for information specialists and people in libraries. So first I wanted to touch on vendor consolidation. The best example of this online, I don't know how many of you visited Marshall Breeding's website. Marshall Breeding tracks consolidation in the integrated library services and now the cloud-based library services platforms, so ILSs and LSPs. And his chart goes, interestingly, it's kind of a reverse chart where it starts with 1980 on the right side and then moves over that way. But you can see how all of these little companies that existed in 2000 and 2010 have now all been consolidated into Thomson Reuters and Clarivate, right? And you can see that a lot of little products have kind of clumped together to become one product. And that's not just happening in ILSs and LSPs. It's just Marshall Breeding does a really nice job of illustrating it. If you ever want to be totally shocked by the amount of consolidation in our library vendor industry, just go visit Marshall Breeding's web pages. Another thing that's happening, so we're getting consolidation where products are kind of glomming together and becoming super products. We're also getting situations where we are not just buying published end products. We're not just buying journals. We're not just buying court reporters. We're not just buying, SEC filing platforms. We are also getting sold and buying preprint stuff, so stuff that happens before publication, and then post-print stuff, the research evaluation process. So this is a study from Leslie Chan's lab, The Knowledge Gap. They're also doing amazing work about kind of consolidation and the monetization of the entire, academic process. But this is a case study written by Alejandro Posada and George Chen under the auspices of Leslie Chan's Knowledge Gap. So it's a really great study. I love it a lot. It's called I think Rent Seeking, and I think it maybe name checks Elsevier, but it's a really interesting study because it shows how the companies because of data analytics in large part are now able to not just make money at the point of sale, but they also make money from our preprints and then from tracking clicks on our preprints. If anyone uses Bpress or SSRN, you see that Pure is a part of Bpress and SSRN, and that's because Elsevier owns all of those companies. that's all Elsevier. If you think, oh yeah, we use Bpress as our institutional repository, you're using Elsevier. If you're using SSRN, you're using Elsevier, and then they are able to collect data analytics on those preprint platforms, and then sell those data analytics after the fact in the research evaluation process. They sell those to like grant funders and institutions that are considering who to give tenure to or who to hire, right? So they're not just integrating companies together and consolidating that way, they're also monetizing kind of outwards. They're monetizing more of the research process. So this is what it looks like with the products overlaid. And I think these are all Elsevier products, but you can see publication process, the research process, the publishing process, and then the research evaluation process on the other side. And those all used to be independent companies, right? And they've all consolidated. So when you think about maturing industries, market consolidation, this is what I think about, and this is why my book is called Data Cartels, because really what we're dealing with are kind of these burgeoning, ever-growing monopolies. And this is an example of this is actually the monopoly that spurred our whole antitrust law scheme, Standard Oil. And Standard Oil was a big monopoly back in the industrial era because oil was such a critical resource in industrialization that Standard Oil had a ton of power, right? So Standard Oil they compared Standard Oil to like this octopus because the oil company was so powerful that it reached into all the industries. Every industry depended on the oil company. And then it was also able to capture government offices because the government depended on oil. Just everybody needed oil. And today, a lot of people say we've moved from the industrial era to the information era. And that means that information companies have the same power. Yeah, I do not have the artistic skills of that artist, so this is my version. But what data companies also can reach, like octopuses, across a lot of informational segments, a lot of informational markets, and become very large, right? And so this is an example. A data company can own, huge news assets. Like Thomson Reuters has its own news company. Rita Elsevier LexisNexis has the biggest news archive in the world, so it says. And it can, all the academic journals, we all know about the academic journal oligopoly. Legal information, that's a duopoly in the United States. You either use Thomson Reuters, Westlaw, or LexisNexis, which is Rita Elsevier LexisNexis. And they're also huge data brokers. These companies have some of the biggest data dossiers and data portfolios of personal data in the world. And that's actually what drew my attention to this topic in the first place, because it is the creepiest thing that these companies do. So I'm about to get to that, which is kind of like the grand finale, because it's creepy. Why not end on a creepy note? So new business equals new customers. This is what I was talking about when I described data companies as not having libraries as primary customers anymore. Publishers, we were huge customers, right? Now, we are just one of many customers. We are among law firms, landlords, police, healthcare systems, government agencies. We are like, we're not in the front of the line anymore, right? These companies don't need us as much. They don't care about us as much. And we can feel that in our negotiations with them, right? I know in law librarianship for like the last 20 years, we've been talking about this a lot. Customer relations aren't as good as they used to be. The companies don't seem as willing to bend to meet our needs. And that's because they just don't need us as much. They have all these other customers now, right? And here are some examples specifically of their creepier customers. They sell huge data dossiers and predictive policing products to law enforcement. This is actually the article that tipped me off to this whole problem in 2017 and what started my entire investigation. LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters are major data sellers to ICE, and they actually help to kind of fuel ICE's predictive policing and immigration tracking systems, which is in 2017 when child separation was like a hot issue, and this was a big topic, right? So big that reporters were reporting on it, and I was surprised to see Lexis and Westlaw's parent companies named in this article, right? It's not just law enforcement, though. These companies sell personal data products to a lot of other agencies, including like the Postal Service, the IRS, local, all sorts of local agencies, a lot of child welfare agencies. LexisNexis says that it sells personal data products to 70% of local government and almost 80% of federal agencies. Landlords, LexisNexis data gets sold to tenant screening companies, which, because the data is imperfect, leads sometimes to bad outcomes. People are unable to get housing. Healthcare systems, LexisNexis is proud to be participating in fighting the opiate war with healthcare systems. They sell a lot of data products to healthcare systems, and one of the things they do is tag people who might be more at risk of like opioid addiction or other illnesses that might, bring unwanted attention to them or make certain types of healthcare treatments hard to access. LexisNexis sells a ton of data products to insurance companies and also to banking institutions. This article is interesting because it talks about some of the kind of data problems and maybe data imperfections that I mentioned earlier about imperfect data dossiers. So this is what really initially caught my eye, but then I kind of like meta-minded around even bigger problems, because I think as librarians we see these problems, which are kind of shocking, but also like just the informational problems associated with kind of all this consolidation are big information issues, right? So I wanted to very quickly just dive into when these types of companies are their new customers, like what are they selling them? So they sell these companies risk solution products. Here's just kind of a list. I'm using LexisNexis not because it's the only company doing this, it's just because they have such a nice website where they describe what they do in such great detail. But all the companies, I'm not picking on LexisNexis, they just really lay it out really well on their website. So they sell raw public records data from from over 10,000 sources. They have like billions of our data. We all have a data dossier in LexisNexis, and it's more invasive than any other universal identifier. Like, we're told not to share our social security numbers because that's, it's associated with a lot of private information. Our LexID is more invasive than our social security numbers. They can link us together. They can alert like an insurer, a healthcare provider, a law enforcement agency anytime something changes in our data dossier, like if you get a speeding ticket or you're admitted into a hospital or you move, right? You can, if you're a customer, you can get pinged when that happens. They can ID people who don't want to be ID'd. Thomson Reuters actually calls this making the invisible visible. So like, let's say you're trying to fly under the radar online, or you just don't want to be identified for any number of reasons. They'll fix that for you. They'll show the world who you are. They can map us out geospatially where we are. They can batch process, which is kind of a metrics function. They can like make a hot list of who the 10 most dangerous people are, whatever they want. They can rank people and make a list of how we're ranked. And they can share, they actually pool data. Like, there are thousands of law enforcement agencies that use LexisNexis as a common pool where they all just pour all of the data that they've collected, and then they can share data amongst themselves, which is a lot like the fusion centers that were created after September 11th that civil rights organizations said were problematic. Now Lexis is just doing it on the side as part of its data business without any oversight or regulation from the government, which is great. It's so great. Really comforting. So this is we each have a LexID. Like, if you've ever like looked at a computer the wrong way, or like been on Facebook, or somebody has tagged you on Facebook, you have a LexID. They have 283 million LexIDs at the time of this webpage. Those LexIDs contain 78 billion records, and they get data streams from over 10,000 sources, which is one of the reasons the data tends to be wrong so much of the time. They can't vet the fire hose of data, personal data, that's always coming into their systems. So this data is used across all of their products, and I don't know for sure how, I can't see into their company, but there's no promise that this type of technology isn't being used in library products as well. So both data being collected and data being, kind of compiled, I don't know how that's being used in the products that we buy from them, but I do know that it's being used in their other products, right? And they have not, I've asked them so many times to explain it or to maybe promise that they're not going to use library resources with this stuff, and they have not been able to promise that they don't use, that our library products aren't a part of this system. So hey, if anyone's out there who wants to make that promise, yeah, do that. I haven't heard anything positive in that regard. So just because I didn't want to pick on one company, I wanted to also, Clarivate also describes how it's broadening its systems into data analytics, and it describes its acquisition of ProQuest as an opportunity to use ProQuest Data Cloud with the billions of harmonized data points in its Clarivate Research Intelligence Cloud. So that, to me, that feels like pretty much like Clarivate saying, hey, we're going to take all the ProQuest data that you've been collecting in your libraries, and we're going to use that for our other data analytics products over here. Is that okay with you? Right? That feels like what Clarivate's saying there. And here's what Clarivate says it's going to do with our data. I recognize this isn't quite as creepy as law enforcement data, but still, as academics, we should pay attention to this, right? We should keep it on our radar. So they call it evidence-based planning and foresight, but I put database planning and foresight because data, we know, isn't perfect. It's not the best evidence. So they identify emerging research areas where your organization could produce a breakthrough, AKA who you should invest in and who you shouldn't invest in, what projects are worth your while financially, what projects aren't worth your while. They detect emerging technologies before your competitors. They uncover hidden opportunities within your institution's research portfolio, but also maybe they knock out what they perceive as duds, AKA unprofitable research, AKA research that oftentimes is public interest oriented research, right? That's not high tech all the time. That's not always the most profitable, right? So you can see how the new ProQuest and Clarivate are kind of rethinking their products to be data vectors that they can sell to not just our own institutions, but to tech companies, pharma companies, to shape our knowledge system by telling people what to invest in, what labs to set up, what labs to defund, right? We are giving these private companies a lot of power to make decisions that impact knowledge and research, right, at our institutions. So I'm not saying like I said, data analytics could be good, could be bad, but we should definitely keep our eye on this, right? This is something to be vigilant around. So here, I'm going to end really quickly with a few potential problems. Here are the problems that I hope that maybe this whole talk have kind of led you away with. Privacy problems. The risk and metrics products are based on data clouds full of personal data, right? Our personal data is becoming more infused in our research systems, whether we want and consent to that or not, because this is just the nature of what our vendors are doing. And because they are monopolies, duopolies, oligopolies, we have little choice about what vendors we can use. Like, I would love to see you set up a huge institutional library without using ProQuest or Elsevier. Can anyone do that? Let's do it. Woo! No, we can't do that, right? Like, we don't have much of a choice about using these products that are becoming more surveillant, right? They're becoming more infused and reliant on personal data. So they're collecting more data about us, and they're using our data in creepy new ways. It also creates access problems that I think we all have faced. The walled garden platforms and kind of this consolidation and the datification of information, just the fact that all these companies can consolidate all of these bundles of information in their data clouds, means that news, academic research, financial information, all that stuff is becoming less and less accessible, and the prices, because of the monopolization, are less and less negotiable, right? It's harder to afford these things. It's harder to break them apart and buy them a la carte. And the third problem that I list is quality. There's a new emerging, as I see it, kind of data and information quality problem. Because in data analytics, the more information and data you have, the better, because you can crunch all that data and make more data analytics products, right? You want a wealth of information. It's like the soil that they're growing their data analytics products in. So whereas there used to be a lot of concern with, journal quality, or I know in like legal databases, they would never have thrown in a bunch of trial court filings and random legal blogs into information that lawyers were supposed to rely on, right? They wanted to give us the best quality information. But now these companies are really becoming much more open about what kind of information they'll receive. Like on Westlaw, I know there's a lot of like trial court filings that have no precedential value and oftentimes aren't even well drafted, and they're just kind of like blended into the products that they're selling that I teach my new students how to use, right? Brand new lawyers, they don't know what products to use, right? And in the personal data, obviously they're getting fire hose of just new data about us all the time, and that is not being vetted. The companies fully admit that they're not vetting that data. So quality control is becoming more of an issue and something that we should watch for, right? Like we should look at the products they're selling us and maybe point out any databases or data products or information products that they're selling us that maybe we don't think reach the level of quality and kind of vetting that we think our products should be before we give them to our library users. So luckily, I thought of some solutions too. It's not just the problems. Here are some solutions, and I tried to really list solutions that are solutions that we can do cooperatively. They don't hurt libraries, they don't hurt vendors. They're things that we can work on as a team, as an information family, if you will. So privacy problems. I would love to see all the vendors promise to protect and expunge library data. So apply the same privacy norms that we apply in our libraries. The vendor should also do that, right? Like we don't keep circulation data forever. We capture as little data as we can about our library users. That's something that we could all do, us and our vendors, right? And what the most important thing I think we should do is make sure that data brokering products that are being sold to law enforcement, healthcare systems, insurance companies, make sure that there's a wall between that and between library products and research platforms, right? Like, let's just ask the companies if there's any way that they can just promise us that those two businesses are separate. Right? That would be really helpful. Access problems, open and affordable options. I'm not even going to get so far into that because there's a whole open access movement and there's so much work being done around open access. I think that convincing either the information companies or the governments to better fund that and to prioritize that, because we can dream and aspire to do open access, but we need the financial support, right? It takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of labor, it takes a lot of maintenance. So really getting more financial support under the open access movement and open access efforts. And quality problems. One thing that we could do is we could ask the companies to use their profits, because they have a huge, if you look up, there's research showing that like Elsevier has higher profit margins than almost any other industry. Like their profit margins are higher than like Facebook's and Google's, and they're $1 billion company. So maybe they could use some of those profits to focus on quality control, right? They could hire people to vet their products or set up systems that would vet the data and information resources that they're getting. And not just route all of that data to growing more algorithms, to growing more, machine learning AI products, but also dedicate some of that funding to quality control. So honestly, I think that's it. Thanks for listening. It was fun to talk in person. So yeah, I think Q&A, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Is this on? Okay, I'm close. That was easy. I'm not positive what my question is, but I feel like it's a common refrain that if the service is free, you're the product, and we all kind of accept that. And I'm wondering if there's any legal recourse or precedents for these services that we are paying a lot of money for, still scooping up and then reselling our data to other companies. I don't know how we reconcile that, or if we're even beginning to reconcile that on like a national scale. But what do you think? What does that look like?
So I'm a law professor. I'm an administrative law teacher. So I see every problem is a legal problem. It's like, that hammer nail thing. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When there's a problem, to me, it looks like a regulation problem. I have been really surprised that since I really started paying attention to these issues in 2017, there's been zero legislation to deal with data brokering. We all know data brokering is a huge problem. Data brokering is, the side of this work where our data is collected and sold. It's really the selling of like people data. And there's been, it's really a vastly unregulated industry. So I think that kind of, there's been a little bit of action around protecting or preventing data brokering in the predictive policing industry. But I think that from an information specialist and from like a library standpoint, we could collectively think about, and I'm not saying, I never want to put extra work on librarians. Like, we are overworked already. Most of us are doing the job of like the 3 people who, our infrastructure, like let their lines go due to attrition. I know that we are all overworked. So I don't want to say like librarians should do this, but people, I have time, I could do it. People who focus on these issues could think about what would legislation look like that would protect library privacy in the digital era and protect us from this kind of exploitation. Because in the 70s, the American Library Association got big. Like, the 70s were also a time where there was a lot of surveillance, and libraries were being surveilled by like the FBI, and there was a lot of history around that. But in the 70s, the ALA pushed for state laws that required library privacy for paper stacks and for paper circulation records. And I feel like it's time for an update on that kind of regulation, that kind of legislation, whether on the state or federal level. It's time for us to think about what library privacy looks like in a digital era and how we can make the legal infrastructure that really protects that and protects us from being exploited just for doing research or for publishing research.
Hi, I'm Susan Davis from the University at Buffalo, which has the only law school in the SUNY system. Have to get that in since you're a fellow, organization in the state of New York. It's always an interesting thing. But I'm really interested, and thank you for this talk. This is really, really fabulous in terms of getting the wheels churning. But I'm really interested in the quality control part because I've been in electronic resource stuff for a long time, and, in the early years, the companies, they sent it out to third parties, they just massively digitized things, and you would report like, oh yeah, you don't have the right coverage dates or this or that, and like, well, it's 99% accurate, and we're like, yeah, but the users find it, and then they tell the library how bad it is, and of course, I think the library's fault. But nonetheless, we've seen more and more efforts to try to, again, automate as much as possible these massive amounts of information to make the processes go faster and to keep costs down. So it's like, yes, we'd like to have more quality, and libraries complain, and there's certain ILS or whatever you want to call that type of vendor who, again, their big thing is, oh yeah, we're automating these loads, and we got all this quality built in. It's like, no, you don't, because we can see it. But where really is the incentive? Because right now people are expensive. They're more expensive than they ever were. Obviously, the job market is such they can't find qualified people. But what is it going to take for these companies to improve the quality? I mean, do we have to have more of these biased results, causing death or other kinds of things, and having to have a lawsuit? I mean, why do you have to have a lawsuit? Why do we have to sue everybody? Of course, Goodwill is not like what it used to be. But nonetheless, it's the whole quality approach. Like, how could libraries or other parties convince these companies that investing in people to vet the data or find better ways to vet the data within their algorithms is a worthwhile process without, as I say, having this massive lawsuit and some terrible consequence that triggers it? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. And it's such a frustrating question because it really is, it's a hard one to answer. There's no easy answer because automating vetting services that were once human is so much more affordable and efficient, right? It's so much cheaper to just run something through an algorithm and it'll spit out, green, red, or like add, remove, than to have humans carefully sift through it. And unfortunately, so there's she's actually my mentor and one of my favorite law librarians in the whole planet. Susan Neville Omar is a librarian at University of Colorado's law school, and in Boulder, and there are multiple. And she has done a lot of work actually doing empirical research on the inaccuracies of automated law, like automated legal research systems. So how many, how often is a case marked as good law when it's bad law, or vice versa, or how many, how often do the algorithms push the worst cases to the top and bury the best cases, and just different types of inaccuracies and quality problems that happen because of automation. And they're definitely, it's definitely there. Like, there are definitely problems with quality that happen when you automate. And I think, as far as solutions go, maybe one thing I've thought of is making it a problem that is so fundamental, like explaining to the vendors and making it clear that this is a problem so fundamentally important to quality research, to correct research, to scientific and humanities progress, that it needs to be corrected or at least accounted for. And I think, I don't know, the thing that frustrates me most about the quality of information is we are in this world now where misinformation is more prevalent than ever, and we're having all these problems with information bubbles and information spreaders that are just blatantly sharing information that is not high quality information. And to see academia and our academic research that we work so hard to make sure is peer reviewed, is verifiable, is vetted, to see it then kind of trashed in these algorithmic systems that strip away that veracity is really frustrating. So yeah, I'm not sure, because financially it doesn't make any sense to put people back in the equation, but we know that sometimes algorithms are very, useful for eliminating bias, but in a lot of cases, especially with academic platforms, we need humans to make sure that the algorithms are getting it right.
Hi, I'm Chris Ferguson. I'm the interim dean of libraries at Murray State University. This isn't really so much a question as a comment and train of thought. I'm just going to ramble on. You're all welcome. So I was thinking about your comment that if it's free, you're the product. And at my own library, we're having to make some really critical budgetary decisions about what we're able to subscribe to. And we're looking at, we have an increasing number of faculty who start all of their searches at Google and aren't using these really expensive subscription databases. It concerns me that our budgetary situations, our flat or stagnant or even cut collections budget, are contributing to this monetization of our data, because we have in some cases no other choice but to look at either a less expensive or a freely available product, where we then become the data. And then the more our faculty rely on Google as a search interface or creating personal accounts on other websites, that we're not subscribing to, their data becomes part of this. And I don't know what our role is in that, but I very much see the funding of our collections and our budgets as integral into this monetization of our data. And I don't know what our role is or how we begin to, other than really doing some lobbying, like how we counteract that.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and or really great comment. I think it was whatever. But one thing that frustrates, because I am both very much a librarian, but then I'm also, I get this role as I'm a law professor, so I'm outside of libraries for the time being. And what drives me the most crazy about that perspective is how internally we all know that libraries are so important, and we know about all of these roles that libraries serve because we deal with library users every day. But outside of the library, people aren't thinking about the library as much as they should be thinking about the library, which means we're not getting as much external support, right? So I do think lobbying and having library organizations lobby and do that work is important. But what I would love to see in my ideal world, and kind of what I try to live as my current life is telling others and making sure others know that if we don't support libraries and we don't fund libraries, all of the, you know, kind of internet problems that we're running up against with misinformation and, you know, social media issues, those are going to get worse. Libraries are an important player in the information ecosystem, and when we underfund them and when we don't give them the external support we need, whether it's like with legislation or just with recognition in this grand scheme of information, then society loses out. We all lose out, right? So just reminding people that libraries are so important, like this free hub where you have intellectual freedom to go in and research whatever you want with the help of really, really, you know, knowledgeable assistant, like by your side professionals, and to access a whole well of information that you can't find in Google or whatever, and you know, and the promise of not being tracked, so having the freedom to really just look at whatever you want, so important, and you don't get that for free online.
Hello, Ted Westervelt, Library of Congress. I'm following on a little bit from Susan's comment, because I'm thinking along the same lines. You had the three things, and I'm thinking of sort of like the major people they're trying to sell their data analytics products to. And the data as service, fine. Here's a whole bunch of stuff. But the information as service, it sounds like you may get something worthwhile out of this. And the answers as service says, go buy your horoscope, you're as likely to get a good answer out of that.
100%.
And so my question, I'm wondering if my most optimistic moment is that at some point they're going to realize they're funneling all this money to these companies that are giving them their horoscope, which seems like a waste of time. Or, in my more pessimistic moments, do they not care? All they want, but it's their horoscope. On the other hand, it has a stamp and a seal of approval. It looks thick and really meaningful, and they're just going to use it to do what they wanted to in the first place. So ideally, the way the market's supposed to work is they'll figure out they're wasting millions of dollars on garbage, but I'm not sure the market always works that way. So I'd be interested in your thoughts, which side you're falling on yourself. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I totally agree with you. Like, you described the problem perfectly. And like, what makes me sad is that I think it's the latter. I describe this in my book. I always joke with people, I always say in my book now, in my book. But that's where all my research lies. So like, whatever, it's in there. But what I you know, have citations about is like, there are situations where these data analytics have been proven wrong, right? Like, this product is definitely leading you to arrest the wrong people. This product is definitely leading you to make bad business decisions. And nobody cares because it's so easy and so clicky and so, like, nobody cares. There was one situation in Colorado where Colorado law enforcement agency was using this, like, product where you can, it's called Lumen, and it's a LexisNexis product, but you can basically, like, identify, like, let's say I'm like, oh, you're going to commit a crime, and I, like, click a button. I can take a picture of you, and it will automatically line you up with, like, the entire catalog of what is it, headshots, you know, photos, like, booking photos, right? And a lot of the people who have been booked were not booked, you know, were later found innocent, were not booked, you know, your face might not be the same. So there are all of these veracity problems with this predictive policing system or this identifier. And so they took Lumen away. They said, hey guys, you can't use Lumen until we fix these problems. The law enforcement officers are quoted as saying, we just can't wait till Lumen comes back. We just loved using Lumen so much. It was so easy. It was so cool. Like, they want their Lumen back. And yeah, I think that's kind of like Palantir. It's been proven that Palantir's predictive policing systems are not correct. They do not really identify people who are going to commit a future crime. But they're still like a multi-million-dollar company that has tons of government contracts.
So we're basically at the scene in Casablanca where Captain Renault says, I've arrested twice the usual suspects this time.
100%. They're like, yeah, quota. Woo. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Sorry. I feel like you shouldn't be thanking me for that. It's terrible. Okay, so I guess, I'll just say, I think that this is probably the last question. But if anybody has questions, feel free to, like, reach out.
Hi, I'm Matt Bailey from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. We've been finding in licensing negotiations more and more, especially with some of the companies that you mentioned, that they have other customers now and they're more willing to let us walk away instead of really negotiating clauses or advocating for our patrons' privacy. What advice do you have to librarians who want to protect privacy but still want the resources too? And we might not have the leverage we once had.
Yeah, and in most cases you don't, right? You need the resources because that's your library, and you want to be able to offer that to people. So yeah, it's a really tough situation to be in. I don't have an amazing answer, but I do have some amazing information. I've been working this year with Spark, which is I'm totally blanking on the acronym, but it's an amazing organization that focuses on open access and really provides a service to librarians who want to discuss these issues. And we actually are working on making a community of discussion around that exact issue. So it's not, we're just kind of getting it up and running, but hopefully within the next, little while, there will be more opportunities to discuss those issues with other librarians and other stakeholders, because it is similar. So Spark already created a community of discussion around other types of contract negotiations, like the big deal contracts, right? So it is, I think, another situation where we are going to have to try things and see what works and talk to each other. I've actually been working inside my own library system at the CUNYs with other librarians to think of some ways we've been looking at specific contract language that people like Becky Hughes, who does a lot of privacy work, actually made a list of recommended contract language and suggestions. So we've actually been listing those and kind of tailoring them to our institution to see what, if anything, will work. So hopefully we'll be able to report out about that at some point. But yeah, it really, I think, is going to be another layer of negotiations that we have to do. So not just negotiating the content, but also negotiating what content they get from us when we use their products. Yeah, and I guess that's it. It was so nice to be here, and I hope you enjoy the conference. And yeah, in person it's nice to see everyone. That's all. Have a good conference.